Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of Elementary. A great premiere. In this episode, a lot of stuff went down. Obviously, Sherlock ended. It's kind of interesting because you had the whole aspect of Sherlock at the very beginning of the episode laying and in the morgue on one of those, autopsy tables. And it's so interesting because obviously that's him, obviously worrying and waiting until he can get the results back from his MRI and stuff like that. But it's like, where does my fate stand? He's even talking about like the fact of the matter is like, oh, when I'm dead, I can't appreciate this. So I'm trying to appreciate it now. Like the whole aspect of like going through the whole process of it and everything, because it's just in the back of his mind, he's contemplating death and stuff like that. So it just, that whole him laying there just staring off into space like that, it's so symbolic on so many levels. I thought that was just kind of interesting. It's also interesting too because Eugene said like, oh yeah, like he ended up hurting his leg during, I forgot what it was exactly he did, but he's like, oh, as a medical examiner, you would think that I would know to kind of take better care of my body, which is another symbolic thing too, because it's like Sherlock's in a situation he's in right now kind of because he didn't kind of like think things through, because essentially we end up finding out that basically Shinwell hitting him over the head last season is kind of one of the big catalysts to why things are happening to him now. Basically it seems like a lot of the reckless behavior he's kind of demonstrated over that time, as well as just his heroin use, it all kind of led to his brain being in the situation that it's in. But Shinwell hitting him over the head with the bottle was just kind of like the last little kick that kind of ended up setting everything in motion, which is super sad. I wasn't expecting him to tell Joan, but in retrospect, it's like, well, of course he'd tell Joan. I knew he'd tell her eventually, but I wasn't expecting it to be so soon. I figured he was going to wait a little while, but then again, it's like, well, of course he'd tell her because that's his partner. And it's like, it's kind of interesting because he ends up saying like the reason why he doesn't tell Captain Gregson, because it's like, well, it's none of his business. It's kind of like, oh, this is my whole situation, but it's like you still told Joan. But I guess it's like him and Joan work even closer because it's like, you're my partner, you are my friend, so I have to let you know. But it does beg the question, if Joan hadn't brought it up, like would he have told her immediately, or would he have just waited? I mean, that's why I was kind of like actually surprised, because I feel like with who he is, he might have waited. And I thought it was so sweet when she was kind of like, okay, when he broke it all down to her, she's like, stand up, and she goes over and hugs him, and he's like, my personality hasn't changed, Watson. He's not big into hugging and stuff like that, but I still appreciate, because it's like, she cares and loves him, and after everything he's going to be going through, she just wants to, be there to help. This episode, interestingly enough, too, is filled with so many, it's got Trissy Kelly Dunn, obviously, Siobhan on the show Banshee, Allie on Blind Spot. You had Brett Dalton, freaking Grant Ward from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Desmond Harrington, who, the most recent thing I think I saw him in was, it's been a little while, but, Limitless, the TV show. And obviously, he played a main character in the TV show Dexter, which is kind of interesting, but I'll kind of tie that in later on. Basically, this deals with a Sophie Bishop, a woman, kind of stayed in the news a lot because she kind of got caught up in a lot of trouble. She comes from a prominent family, but the partying kind of drug type of lifestyle. And basically over the years, she had tried to clean up, and it led to, but eventually a sex tape between her and the victim in this episode, Sammy, ended up surfacing and brings a whole embarrassment to her family and everything. So it's also dickish, too, because her brother Drew is like, oh, yeah, she's an embarrassment. She's a whore. It's like, God, that's your sister, you piece of... I get she might have caused some problems, but damn, who talks about their sister like that? Because basically they have a trust situation where it's basically you end up finding out she'll get paid $3 million a year if she keeps herself clean and kind of doesn't bring any embarrassment to the family. But we later on find out there's an expulsion to that. If embarrassment comes, that they basically can do a buyout, give her a cool one-time payment of 60 mil and just kind of cut ties with the family. So it's kind of interesting because you knew something was a little up, because the fact is she was super defensive when it came to her family. Because it's like, oh, do you think your family's behind? She's like, no, don't think my brother. No, I brought enough embarrassment to my family. I don't know whether she kind of had that mentality because of her family always had, because she was always kind of the screw up, that her family looked down upon her like that. And because we ultimately find out from her husband that basically he implies that the whole releasing the sex tape thing was their idea, that they came up with it together. I mean, how true that is, I don't know. I don't know if they really explained that not being true or not, but nevertheless, by releasing the sex tape, they wanted to just get the cool 60 million, just because that 3 million a year just wasn't cutting it. So they wanted that huge lump sum all at once. So at least that's what he said, which also just kind of tying it in. I do love the fact is that whole situation of someone trying to bribe Sherlock and Joan to drop the case. It's like, oh, I hear you're looking into Sammy. I heard about your reputation. Drop it for $1 million. Sherlock pauses it, mutes the phone, he comes back. Okay, so me and my partner decided we want $5 million. They were like, $5 million? Wait, what? He's like, okay, and I'll send you the banking information where you can send it. They're like, wait, what? And he hangs up. It's just, to me, it's just like, wait, I'm the one that's supposed to be in control here, and I literally had the response of, wait, what? Like that, it just can be completely slipped out of their control. To be fair, you're dealing with Sherlock Holmes. He's always going to keep you on your toes. And I just thought that was just kind of neat that he kind of turned the tables on him like that. Obviously, it was for the purposes of being able to track where the money is coming from. But I love Joan being like, what the hell are you doing? Like, because he didn't bother explaining to her what he was doing, and it's just like, why are you accepting that money? What are you doing? So I thought that was kind of pretty neat. It is really sad that she ended up dying too, because it's really sad too, because like when the killer ended up killing, well, we know I'll go ahead and talk about it, but Sophie's husband was the killer behind the whole situation, because it's kind of sad because like Sammy was murdered, but then it was like hiding her hair of him, because the whole plastic wrap situation, which is like very reminiscent of Dexter, because that's the one I kind of always associate plastic wrap with, because that was kind of Dexter's like thing, which kind of feeds into the episode a little bit more too, but I'll kind of get to that in a second. I guess because he was getting divorced from his wife anyway, but until she got this 60 million, he couldn't take the chances of doing that. So he orchestrated all of this because he wanted to kind of get her out of the way. Now the 60 million all belongs to him, so greed ended up being the main motive. And I guess he took Sammy out of the picture because Sammy was trying to get the video taken down. And I guess as long as the video stayed up, he could make sure that it stayed in the public eye, and the family would still kind of be pushing further and further for the whole like, oh yeah, go ahead, give her 60 million like she was kind of promised, and just cut ties, essentially. It is kind of sad that he ended up killing his wife. You could definitely tell, like, because Joan kind of picked on it, too. It's like, the moment, like, she mentioned, like, the place that it was associated with, the place where the uploading of the video came from, like, she saw a reaction, too. But, it was kind of like, oh, Sophie had a reaction, like, she knew exactly what was going down, and the next thing we know, she winds up dead, which is sad. So what was interesting to me is how the case was actually solved, because it turns out like Sherlock figured it out, because at the moment the video played too, I was like, well, isn't that a little different? I was like, maybe that's just my imagination, maybe that's not. And it's like, no, that ends up being why Sherlock is able to figure out, because the sex tape was filmed from a different angle, meaning like he already had it set up. So it's like, but how did that work? Apparently he had this whole like camera system set up to his deadlock. The moment he closes the door and locks it, the deadlock, that's what automatically activates the camera. And so obviously Sophie's husband didn't know about this when he was killing Sammy, so clear video of him committing a crime. So, but I also love the whole fact is, like, when the whole situation was happening, it was like they were finding out about Sammy having so many damn sex tapes. It's like, even like Sherlock had to turn the bell. It's like, did you do it film a sex tape with Sammy? And then Bell was like, no. And then Sherlock walked away with the lady's phone. And I love that Watson comes in and she hears the sex noises. She's like, wait, what? And then she gets a text. It's like, it's safe to come upstairs, just watching the sex tape. And she just got to look like, it's always, I love that it's always something when she walks into that, to the brownstone. It's always something. And even Sherlock Gibbon is like, oh yeah, initially it started off for educational purposes, and because the fact of the matter is kind of giving acknowledgement to like, hey, Sammy was really good, and it's like, I don't assume to know everything. Have this little smirk across his face. I'm like, shut up, Sherlock. I love it. So that was the entire case. But obviously a big focus of this episode too is this is all happening while Sherlock is dealing with this whole illness situation. I forgot what it's called. Isn't it PCH, his whole brain situation? Because while he was talking with Drew, Sophie's brother, all the construction site kind of started getting to him. All the noise kind of made it so he couldn't hear. He's kind of getting a headache. Luckily, because Sherlock's him, he was able to read Drew's mouth. Read his lips. I don't know why I said specifically his mouth. So he was able to kind of figure out what was going on, even though he couldn't hear. So. And then he also had that moment of when he went to a room, he was like, honestly, I don't remember why I came here. And like, John trying to make him feel better. It's like, oh, it happens to everyone, but Sherlock's no. It's like, no, it never happens to me. And it upsets him. And I think that's a beautiful thing going into this season, because for Sherlock, he's a guy that relies on his brain. It is a big part of him. It allows him to do what he does, because it's something that comes up in this episode, and I think is kind of an interesting aspect to it, too, kind of tying it all together, is the fact is at the meeting, he goes, yeah, I gave up on these meetings because last season I got so bored. I was like, oh, it's like, oh, so I want to challenge myself, like, leave behind these meetings and stuff like that. And it's just like, oh, I can handle my sobriety on my own. Like, he thought that would kind of spice things up, make things more interesting. And it's like, be careful what you wish for, because now, because of that, and like I said, a combination of his risky behavior, because he gave up all that, it led to him being in the situation he is now. Like, he has these new challenges that have become very overwhelming. It's like, you wanted new challenges, well, you have a new one that complicates every avenue of your life, because it hits him hard, because it's like, he's like, I try to compartmentalize it. It's like, okay, it could be cancer, or it could be something that interferes with how my brain works and basically how I do my job. He's like, I would actually prefer a quick death, because for him, his mind is his everything, It's the thing that he's worked on so much, so well. And now that thing is now becoming his worst enemy, because for him, it's like, okay, like, I give myself enough time with this, sure, but this is going to be affecting my job. And if I can't do my job, how can I keep being sober? Because his job is what keeps him focused and makes him sober. So it's almost like this cycle of like, once his mind takes his job away from him, it also makes it hard for him to stay sober. And if he can't stay sober, how is he supposed to let his brain help? So it's like this endless cycle of like, and it's upsetting, like I said, because it's sad, because you've never seen Sherlock like that, like scared like that. And it's just, it's a new side of him. And I think it adds this whole other element going into this season of him carrying that burden. But you also see like Joan doing whatever she can. It's like, okay, your doctors are doing what they need to, got these plans and stuff, but it's like, oh, but he sees her over here, like, oh, she's done like so much research about it, and it's like, I think that's the beauty of their partnership, because she's like, the fact of the matter is, just want you to know that you're not going through this alone. She's like, I'm going to be there with you every step of the way. And I just thought that was kind of a beautiful mend with their whole relationship, so it's definitely not going to be easy. I'm curious to see how this will affect his work going forward over the course of the season. Also, like, when will Belle and Gregson find out about it? But the final element I want to talk about when it comes to this whole episode is Desmond Harrington's character, Michael. Like, it's kind of weird with how things turned out to be, because I was like, yeah, something's not right about Michael. It's just, I don't know, something felt weird about him right from the beginning. Like, when he walked up to Sherlock and he was like giving the specific date, it's like, oh yeah, this is the last time I was sober. I was like, I guess that could have a double meaning, essentially, because he's like, Sherlock's need to like, keep working to keep his sobriety is what motivated Michael to keep going. He kind of helped, that inspired him, so he's thankful to Sherlock and stuff like that. So, which we then at the end of the episode see him burying a body. So either he's one of those cleaners to a certain situation, like, oh, like people will hire him to clean up crime scenes, or he's a serial killer, which I want to assume is the first one, just because, which that's what I was remarking on earlier, which is interesting considering he was on the TV show Dexter, and that's kind of does that whole thing. So it's interesting that his character in this show potentially could be one. But that's what I was talking about. His whole sobriety, it could be like, maybe he stopped for a while, but hearing Sherlock talk about, oh, being so dedicated to work, it's like, no, I need to get back to my work, and his work being a killer. I mean, maybe he legitimately struggled with drugs too, or maybe he had a different addiction that he was trying to kick. I mean, because it seems like, no, killing wasn't the addiction. It seems like that was the work he was invested in. So that's interesting. Because I was curious, like, what was going to be, like, the main overarching story going into this season. I was curious about it, and it seems like it's going to be potentially Sherlock being right next to a serial killer and not even knowing it, which could feed into the element of the show, too, where it's like Sherlock is, slowly losing, potentially losing his mind. So we might see a situation where it's like he might start figuring Michael out, but then he might start doubting himself, because it's like, I know that's part of my brain. Maybe he starts bringing it up to Joan. It's like, oh, like, no, the fact of the the matter is you're just seeing things because your mind isn't well. Maybe he even confines that into Michael, and Michael kind of starts using that to his advantage. Maybe that's why he kind of went out of his way to kind of bring himself closer to Sherlock, because it is kind of like a cat and mouse thing of like, oh, like how close can I get, you know? I mean, it seems like it was a 100% accident that he ended up running into, Sherlock after all the time. But the point was, the fact is he got the specific day down. I was like, oh, it's been 4 years, blah, 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 months and days since, you know, he last used, and Sherlock kind of inspired him. So it was just kind of interesting that, like, getting down to minute details like that, which might be kind of make this whole clash even more interesting, because it's like, well, it's Sherlock with his mind versus this dude, whatever his situation is, which we don't know. We're just getting introduced to him this episode. So it's definitely going to be interesting going forward, like I said, especially considering what Sherlock's going through. I'm also curious when it comes to this whole condition, will we see more stuff kind of with his mom or not? That might prove to be even more like, you know, because obviously it manifested itself as like, oh, I'm the side of your brain that wants you to get better. So, but maybe we'll kind of see that kind of reprise itself kind of again this season. I don't know. Maybe it'll continue to kind of manifest itself in just the way that it has been, because it is something that isn't permanent. It seems like it could be, like, it's like, oh, like his doctors told him it could get worse before it gets better, which ultimately most likely will over the course of the show. But it's something that's like, it doesn't necessarily have to be something permanent. So whether things will work out for Sherlock, we have to keep watching to find out. So I'm very interested to see what goes down in the next episode with all of this continuing forward. And obviously, I'm going to talk about it. I don't really bring it up a lot of times, but I feel the need to. And obviously, at the end of the episode, it says, in loving memory of Nelson Ellis. Obviously, you know, he played Shinwell last season. Obviously, another role you might know him best for, you know, is one I knew him best for, was Lafayette on True Blood. So, I'm not sure about the circumstances, because I typically don't read into those things. I just leave it kind of, it is kind of what it is, what, you know, sadly situation. I didn't find out until like a couple months ago, because randomly my mom was watching something on Netflix and he was in it. And then at the very end of it, it said that. So that's when I knew he passed away. So, rest in peace is, you know, all I can say. You know, I know it's kind of leaving this episode off on a downer, but like I said, I typically don't mention these things, but, you know, in this particular case, I was like, I'll mention it. So, but really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good